attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11th, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Free Fall. Hi everyone, this is Andy Steele, and like always, I'm happy to be back again for another show. I'm going to be joined today by John Michael Talboo. He'll be talking about Mark Basile's latest experiment with primer paint chips from the World Trade Center towers, igniting them and finding that these paint chips do not have the same reaction that the red-gray chips cited in the thermate paper have. This, of course, serves to debunk suggestions that the red-gray chips are just primer paint themselves. So we'll be going over that in greater detail here later on the show, so stay tuned. This will be a very important interview. Now, if you're tuning in for the first time, this is 9/11 Free Fall. The show is about 9/11 Truth, focusing mainly on the science and hard evidence, and I spotlight guests who are out there doing the work that government investigators and the media should be doing themselves, but refuse to. The facts clearly demonstrate that the Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7 were brought down in a pre-planned controlled demolition on 9/11, but because this reality has serious implications, to say the least, and because of a mixture of government agendas and the cognitive dissonance of many citizens, the truth remains buried in the whispers of an increasingly awakening American public. This show is about shattering those whispers with a voice that is loud, that is unapologetic, and that stands on the side of law and order when it tells the truth and says that the government is lying about what really killed all those people in New York over 11 years ago. We are in this to win this, folks, and we will force this establishment to admit to the crime of the century. Like I always say every week, folks, the group you need to look up right now is Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. These people have tirelessly been chopping away at the trunk of the official story for several years now, and because of them, the giant, dead, rotting tree of the government's official lie is falling over. Okay, the movies Blueprint for Truth and 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out, lay out the evidence that we talk about on this show over and over again, and you can watch those movies for free on YouTube by doing a search of the titles, or better yet, you can buy the DVDs of these movies at AE911Truth.org and show them to your friends and family this 4th of July. And folks, have no doubt, standing up and speaking out about what really happened on 9/11 is the honorable American thing to do. And it goes further for honoring the spirit of our country than just waving a flag or cooking a hamburger outside on the grill. All right? The spirit of your ancestors and the spirits of Americans yet to be born are calling on you to stand up and do the right thing. All right, if you're not woken up yet, then you need to do so now. And if you have woken up, then you need to find the volunteer tab on the right-hand side of the screen at AE911Truth.org and let that organization know what you can do to help them out in this all-important mission. And I've said it many times here on this show, folks, we're not here on Earth just to be passive observers. We're here to help shape our collective destiny and make sure this ship known as humanity doesn't sail over the waterfall. All right, we all need to grab the wheels here of this tremendous ship and right this terrible wrong before we hit the rocks at the bottom of that waterfall. All right, that's AE911Truth.org. You need to go there right now. All right, what a week it's been in the news, and I've mentioned this on this show before, and I'll say it again. 9/11 Truth evidence reaches more and more people, not just as we expose them to it, but as other issues grip the nation's attention and our political and intelligence establishment loses more and more credibility. All right, that's why it's important to always talk about it, because you plant seeds. And the seeds we plant sometimes sprout after they're watered by revelations about how our civil liberties are under attack. And this is certainly true in regard to the latest revelation about the NSA spying on Americans, with Edward Snowden leaking info to Glenn Greenwald at The Guardian about the PRISM spying program. And it's been all over the news, and this was a major topic of discussion on C-SPAN's Washington Journal last week. And in the midst of the discussion, 9/11 Truth activists have been working hard to remind the rattled Americans that the NSA spying is just a symptom of the post-9/11 world, and that the post-9/11 world is based on a lie, and they're doing this by inserting the controlled demolition evidence into the discussion. Now, I want to make sure we have plenty of time with our guests today, so I'm not going to be playing all of those clips right now. I'll be putting together a new compilation video shortly, so you'll be able to see those for yourself. Just keep an eye out for it on 911freefall.com. Of course, it'll be first up at YouTube. But there's been a lot going on this front, folks, believe me. I am going to play one question, however, and I think it's the best question asked, and it should be the question being asked by everyone right now. So the guest that day was Representative Jim Himes. He's a Democrat from Connecticut, for whatever that's worth. And on there, it seemed like he's doing what most other politicians are doing, and they're doing kind of this damage control and trying to paint this Snowden person as an enemy of America, as a potential Chinese spy, and trying to put out the fire, basically, of people being outraged over this. So we're going to play that call right now.
Jim Himes right now is our guest, Democrat of Connecticut, member of the Intelligence Committee, also the Financial Services Committee. He's a graduate of Harvard. He's a Rhodes Scholar, and he worked for Goldman Sachs for several years before coming over to Congress, getting elected to Congress. And the first call from him comes from North Carolina. Whitney's in Raleigh, Democrat. Hi, Whitney. Whitney?
Hi.
Please go ahead.
All right. The NSA spying on Americans has been whispered about for years, but it took a brave whistleblower to give up his normal life to make politicians and the media acknowledge it. My question for you is Congress going to wait for someone else to give up his life before you acknowledge that only explosives could have brought down World Trade Center Building 7 on 9/11?
Well, let's go to her referring to Mr. Snowden as a whistleblower. Do you agree?
Let's do that.
Okay, let's go to her referring to him as a whistleblower, because we don't want to talk about that giant 47-story building that just collapsed for no common sense reason on 9/11. We don't want to go there. Okay, so they avoid the question, and there's other examples of them. You'll see in the compilation video, folks, and where I accidentally cut it off there, but you'll see it in the compilation video, is the congressman says that he's disturbed by all these people asking questions about the biggest mass murder in U.S. history. He doesn't like that. He's very disturbed that people have common sense and discernment and care about what's happened to their world and what really happened that day. But in case you didn't hear, I'm going to repeat the question she asked. Okay, it says it took a brave whistleblower to give up his normal life to make politicians and the media acknowledge this NSA thing, to acknowledge it. Is Congress going to wait for someone else to give up his life before you acknowledge that only explosives could have brought down World Trade Center Building 7 on 9/11? And that is a very good question, folks. Let's answer it. Or let's ask it ourselves. Is it going to take somebody walking away from a six-figure salary, from a relationship, from a family, from a comfortable life, perhaps even giving up their life, to make the public care about the laws of physics and the fact that two planes can't knock down three towers? And it amazes me. It amazes me. None of these phonies, these TV show hosts, these politicians cared about the evisceration of the Fourth Amendment until this Snowden guy essentially laid down on the grenade and forced this issue into public discussion. And we don't get off too much on those issues here on this show. We're very focused. But more amazingly, despite the fact that the case has been made about the controlled demolition of the buildings in New York on 9/11, these people who are supposedly representing us, politicians, media, these people could care less about it. They want to run from it. All right, they want to hide. They want to make sure that if it ever does rise, this issue, to the level of discussion that this NSA scandal has reached, that they've been nowhere near it. And as the late George Carlin said in a routine of his once, these people don't just appear out of nowhere. They come from us. They come from the American people, from the citizens. And my question is this, though. What good are they? Why do we need them? I mean, you've heard these people, these politicians answering. Well, I mean, you've heard the answers. They're not answers. You're hearing evasive answers. You're hearing non-answers. So what use are these people to America? Now, Congress has mainly become a rubber stamp for whatever political party has the majority, folks. Anybody can do that. Seriously, if you can get up in the morning and manage to put on a tie, I don't really see how you're not qualified to be one of these congressmen. All right, it is ridiculous that we have to agitate for justice on this important issue, 9/11 Truth, the controlled demolition of the buildings. It's utterly ridiculous that anyone has to figure out how to squeeze all the research about Building 7 or the Twin Towers into a 2-sentence question and play a cat and mouse game with a TV host for our so-called elected representatives to hear it. Absolutely ridiculous that somebody has to become an outlaw in order for the establishment to discuss and debate a real issue. And I mentioned the lives lost on 9/11 and the wars that followed 9/11, but there's also lives touched by the fight to expose the truth of 9/11 and the symptoms of the post-9/11 world. And when this is all over and the truth is exposed, a lot of people are going to have a lot of explaining to do for themselves. And while I don't advocate violence, it doesn't solve anything, I call on everybody hearing this broadcast right now and in the future, if they're hearing it in some archive somewhere in the darkest corners of the web, if we still have the web when you're hearing this in the future, I want you to let it be widely known who these people were that stood in the way of Americans knowing the truth. And don't let them weasel away and pretend they either had no clue or that somehow they actively sought to turn the tide. Don't let them revise history, all right? Because that history will judge them. It will judge them. And you need to not forget who they were. They say never forget 9/11. We'll never forget the fight for 9/11 truth. Never forget these people that stood in your way. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. Okay, at this time we're going to take our 10 seconds of silence that we take every week to remember the victims of 9/11 and their families and everyone who has died in the wars that followed 9/11. So we're going to do that right now. Okay, our guest this week, John Michael Talboo, has been a 9/11 activist since 2004. He was a member of the steering committee at 911truth.org. He is the creator of Debunking the Debunkers blog, a contributing writer for AE911 Truth and visibility911truth.org, where he will be taking over hosting their podcast in the near future. John Michael, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thank you for having me very much.
Thank you, and thank you for writing about this important topic that we're going to be discussing today. It is very important. I was very excited when I saw this. We mentioned it very briefly last week, didn't give it enough justice. This deserves its whole show. Before we get into all of that, since this is your first time here on the program, please go ahead and tell the audience a little more about yourself, how you woke up to the true nature of the 9/11 crime, and what prompted you to start speaking out about it.
Sure. Back in 2004, if memory serves me, is when I saw 2 different films. One was Fahrenheit 9/11, and the other one was called Hijacking Catastrophe. They're both kind of 9/11 Truth light, I guess you would say. You know, they raise some interesting questions. They don't raise all of the major questions of the 9/11 Truth movement, but they touch the surface, and you know, they get to the tip of the iceberg anyway. Hijacking Catastrophe, for instance, talks about the Project for the New American Century think tank, which before 9/11 said that a catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor would be needed to do such things as go in and remove Saddam Hussein and secure Mideast oil and things like that. So that definitely piqued my interest. And around the same time, I'm a listener to the Coast to Coast AM radio program, and I started to hear Alex Jones on there. Thought the guy was completely nuts at first, but he kept saying, check the evidence, just please, you know, don't trust me, go read the articles. And he had an archive of mainstream news articles that I went and checked out for a couple hours one day, as he suggested, and it was off to the races from there for me. You know, and after that, I discovered the controlled demolition evidence, and so I got involved then. You know, just early on, you know, getting on message boards and just trying to raise awareness and handing out flyers and things like that. And it wasn't until 2008 when I started the Debunking the Debunkers blog, because I saw a need to continue the effort that David Ray Griffin had started with his book, Debunking 9/11 Debunking, and kind of take on the debunkers as things, you know, as the debates progressed, and have it be a, you know, an extension of that work that would continue on into the future. And we've been doing it ever since 2008, and I've got a nice little list of contributors to the site at this point, from several different countries and states, including Adam Taylor, who you had on your program last week, I believe. I've been on several times, so that's how I got into things, and that's where I'm at. So. Yeah,
that's a very good blog, and I like your content. It's not sensationalized or anything. It's just hardcore the science, and you publish papers like Adam Taylor's, where he discussed the real collapses from fire, not full collapses, most of them, or there's some other kind of building, where he takes on these kind of issues. And so this is a great resource. People need to go to Debunking the Debunkers and check it daily. And what you've provided as a service, because I noticed this too when I first woke up and throughout the years, is that it's a street fight. It's a street fight to get past some of the nonsense arguments that the other side puts up. And you constantly have to be fighting against whatever mirage is concocted. When they change the official story or whatever it is, when they come up with some new explanation, you're constantly having to just go after that. But we stand on the side of truth. Our story doesn't change. The evidence speaks for itself. The science speaks for itself.
Sure. Yeah, and we also get into topics like NORAD and prior knowledge, and we try to cover the whole gamut as it were. But yeah, I mean, it goes everywhere from the mainstream debunkers that we take on, like Popular Mechanics, and Adam's written a nice series of articles for AE911 Truth on that topic as well, debunking the real 9/11 myths. Which covers their new updated version of the Popular Mechanics book. But then there's also like the James Randi forum where a lot of the debunkers are at, and where a lot of the internet debate takes place. So we try to tackle those, debunkers as well. And there's some debunkers that I'm cordial with that I just disagree with, and we just debate. But there's a lot of ad hominem attacks that go on, a lot of character assassination. We try to cut through all that and let people see that it's just that's all it is. It's just a distraction. It's ignore the evidence, attack the person.
Well, what I notice about this topic with 9/11 Truth, it's not like a normal scientific debate. It's not about a couple of friendly people arguing for 20 years about the biological properties of a certain moss growing on a tree, where nobody's feelings get hurt, nobody's personally attacking, because it's just it's a debate where you try to find the truth. But in this case, the issue is so heated, and the other side, with the attacks and the name calling, it is not pleasant to participate in some of these debates. Even though you're right, you're still enduring a lot of abuse. So yeah, it's very interesting. And again, people will write in the history books about this, and we'll just cover the debates of this issue for a long time to come. All right, we've talked about the explosives in the dust of the World Trade Center before on this show, but there may be people listening who have never heard a previous broadcast of this show, never heard of this issue before, stumbled upon it accidentally, whatever. Can you please set the stage for them? Explain briefly the discovery of the red-gray chips and their significance in the dust, and to tell our audience about that.
Sure. So I believe it was in 2006 that Stephen Jones, who's from Brigham Young University, he's a physics professor, was a physics professor there, he announced the discovery of these red-gray chips. Now, they followed a long line of evidence that was pointing towards some form of thermite being used in the destruction of the towers in Building 7. Everything from molten metal flowing from the South Tower that is orange in color, that the National Institute of Standards and Technology tried to claim was molten aluminum, which in daylight conditions would be silvery. He conducted experiments to show that, no matter how much organic material was mixed in, concrete, glass, wood, whatever, as they suggest, it would make that color appear. No matter how much he tried to test their theory, that it wouldn't happen, that it was always silvery in appearance. However, thermite, when it pours, is the exact color that we see there. So it followed a long chain of evidence And this is kind of, the culmination of, all that line of evidence, finding these red-gray chips, meaning they're red on one side, gray on the other. Some of them have less gray material on the other side. Some of them have none. There's just red chips. But they appear to be, and he proposes that they are a form of thermite known as nanothermite or superthermite, which can be tailored to be explosive, or it can be very highly energetic material, pyrotechnics material. So in 2006, he announced that he was looking into these, and by 2009, him and 8 other authors, including Niels Harrit from Copenhagen University, who's a nanochemistry expert and a professor of chemistry there, or was. As the lead author, they published a paper called Active Thermitic Material Discovered in Dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center Catastrophe. And in this paper, they outline all the reasons that they believe this is what this material is. That is the spent remnants, the leftovers of this material being used in some way, shape, or form in the destruction of the towers. There's been some disagreement among the authors and conjecture here and there as to how exactly these materials were used. They could even be a fuse for other types of explosives, or they could be the explosives themselves. Point being, though, they shouldn't be there, and it's explosive material. So that was published in 2009. It was published in the Bentham family of journals, bentham.com, their open chemical physics journal, and it is a peer-reviewed paper. So after its publication, the main thing that was attacked was the peer review process itself, the journal, and I can get into all that if you'd like. So, for instance, at one point, one of the reviewers, it was revealed, he had revealed himself, his identity, and he was actually, from what I can garner, was suggested by the authors as to be one of the reviewers, which is perfectly acceptable. But being that he already had some views on 9/11 Truth, a lot of people tried to dismiss, him as being a person that should be reviewing the paper, although he is more than qualified. This is a gentleman who has reviewed like 600 manuscripts himself, written, I think, 100 peer-reviewed papers, something along those lines. Qualified in, writing about chemistry and these exact type of topics. His name's David L. Griscom. But as I point out in this recent article we put out, he's only one of the reviewers. The other reviewer, I was informed, was not a truther beforehand, was not selected by the authors, and concurred with Griscom that, if the 11 pages of revisions to the paper that he suggested were handled adequately, that the paper should go ahead and be published. And after, I think it led to, I forget how long, quite an extensive amount of time that they had to do revisions to the paper to address all the issues that Griscom had wanted them to address. But in the end, Griscom said that he found nothing wrong with the paper whatsoever. So there's also some controversy about one of the editors resigning, saying that she had never seen that the paper was published in the journal. Interestingly, though, it seemed to be more political than anything, because she said she wasn't qualified to judge the merits of the paper. However, she is an expert in the exact type of thing the paper is talking about. So all of this was really just attacking, the paper in indirect ways. And it wasn't until just recently that a preliminary report was put out by Dr. James Millett, which actually tried to, with science, refute this paper. And his conclusion, opposed to theirs, is that the material is simply paint, just paint chips. And this is where the debate comes in. And this is what makes it's so interesting, the new video that's out, which can be viewed at the debunker site. It's 911debunkers.blogspot.com. Mark Basile is a chemical engineer. He's worked in industry for more than 25 years. He can be seen in the new film by architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, 9/11 Explosive Evidence. And what he's done in these videos, he shows an ignition of one of the red gray chips. It ignites, it flashes, and he shows this compared to two just paints from his house. First of all, just a blue paint chip and a red paint chip, just to show that they don't flash, they don't act anywhere near the same, and they don't. Most importantly, they don't create molten iron spears after the ignition. And I'll touch on that just a bit more here in a second. The other paint chip that he shows is actually a known World Trade Center primer paint taken from a monument in Clarkson College in New York. So they took some of these samples of known World Trade Center primer paint. Shows in the video, tries to ignite this. It doesn't flash in any way. It just turns black. No ignition, no molten iron spheres. Now, Mark was the first person to discover that when these chips were heated to about 430 degrees centigrade, they created molten iron spears, which implies a high temperature chemical reaction, like of about 1,000 degrees centigrade. So, Millett, in this preliminary report he has released, will not do these ignition tests. And I think that it's really telling that he won't, because if he is testing the same material, and there's a lot of evidence to show that he's not testing the same material, but if he was, we would easily see by him doing the similar video if he was testing the same material, because if it's the same, it will ignite in the same way. Then we would at least know that he's testing the same material. But if he wasn't testing the same material, obviously it's not going to ignite from everything we can see, because we've found no other paint that does this. And even if he was testing the same material, he would then be forced to explain the molten iron spears.
Well, see, and not to interrupt you, but I just want to ask, I find it hard to believe that Millett would just refuse to do it without giving some kind of explanation. Has he given any kind of attempt at a reasonable explanation of why you wouldn't perform the same test in the name of science?
Yes, he believes that the presence, and it's agreed, that the presence of elemental aluminum would be needed for these chips to be thermite. The ingredients needed would be iron oxide and nano aluminum. And so, the original paper by Jones and company, Herrick, etc., they, to show that it wasn't an aluminosilicate, which is, or kaolinite, which is a pigment used in paints, to show that it wasn't an aluminosilicate, they took the chips and they soaked them in a paint solvent called methyl ethyl ketone. And when they did this, the silicone and the aluminum separated to show that they're not chemically bound together, therefore it's not an aluminosilicate. He did this same test and got completely different results, no separation. So what's that tell you? Somebody's either messing up in their methodology, testing different materials, or lying. And that's the thing, there's a totally different result there, and he says because it didn't separate, there is no elemental aluminum, therefore it's not thermite, and he doesn't need to do the ignition test.
And I'm not an expert on how these processes work, so maybe you can explain to me. Is there any kind of neutral authority? For instance, if you're going to have, when they have Consumer Reports, you'll have a magazine that will take two opposing products, let's say Coke and Pepsi, and they'll do the same tests on each of the cans, and they'll tell you this one is more fattening than this one, blah, blah, blah. Is there any kind of neutral authority where Mark Basile and this Dr. Millett could kind of go up and say, okay, we're going to put up or shut up, and you're going to judge it, and we're going to have a final outcome by doing the same thing?
Well, that's exactly what's great about what Mark's proposing, because Mark will oversee the testing, but the testing that he wants to have done, which I need to emphasize, it will do all of the further testing that the original paper said needed to be done, and it will go above and beyond that, and it'll do everything debunkers have wanted done, and it should be definitive. But the best thing about it is it'll be a single blind study. The technicians doing the tests will be at a lab who will have no idea that the materials they're testing are from the World Trade Center. So, you know, we can trust that their conclusions, that the conclusions garnered from their work, that there was no bias in the way the tests were conducted or anything, you know. So.
And we've had Rick Shattuck on in the past to talk about that, and we do need to reiterate that. And Mark is still trying to raise money for that test. So people, you need to go. What is it? MarkBasile.org, where you can make the donation.
Correct.
All right.
And
folks.
The lab tests are expensive, so. You know, we're looking for $5,000 to try to get the test done. We've raised about $1,500, so we're getting there. Not as fast as I would like, but if people could help out with anything, even $1, you can donate as low as $1. It all helps. You know, I made several donations myself. You know, the quicker we can get this thing going, you know, and that's what we need. You got two different opposing viewpoints here. To where somebody definitely has to be wrong, and so let's get a third party in there, an independent party, and let's get this thing figured out. If it's not nanothermite, it's not the end of the controlled demolition evidence by any means, but we need to know, you know, either way.
Well, what about funding from the other side? I mean, is the other side interested in if I'm trying to look at the world through their eyes, it seems that they might want to raise at least half of the money, $2,500, just to put the whole debate to rest. You know, and so is there any kind of offer like that from the other side?
No, not that I've seen. They just a lot of nitpicking as to why they wouldn't do so is my opinion on it. You know, you know, they say things like they don't see the need again for the ignition test. They don't think that's important. They put more emphasis on other tests, but he's going to be doing those other tests as well. I really don't see where they have a leg to stand on and not supporting Mark in his endeavor.
Well, that's ridiculous because NIST puts up the same argument, and I was listening to you in the very beginning, and how how they would dismiss this and they would try to nitpick and attack the peer review. The peer reviewers and stuff. I mean, a very simple way of putting this to rest would be for NIST to test its own dust samples and perform the same tests. And now, if my tax money can go towards spying on me, certainly I would not mind having a few of my dollars go towards investigating the mass murder of 3,000 of my fellow countrymen.
Yeah.
So it'd be an easy way to put this to rest, but they're not doing it. The other side doesn't want to do it. And whatever happened to scientific curiosity? I mean, when you're a kid, as long as it's not dangerous, you try different things just for the heck of doing it, just to see what would happen because you're bored. Okay, so even if you want to think that we're just total nutcases who have no leg to stand on, which isn't true, just to put it to rest, just to entertain your curiosity, why wouldn't you experiment and do all the experiments that you can?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when this was asked in an FAQ, did you test for explosives? Their answer was no. And the reasoning was, well, there's no reason to testing for what's not there, which obviously the response was, well, how do you know it's not there if you don't test? I mean, it's the most unscientific thing you could ever think of. It's utterly ridiculous. I mean...
Well, it's not a real investigation. A question that one of our guests in the past, John Metters, has been trying to get on C-SPAN, but they keep interrupting him, is saying, pointing out that NIST didn't test its dust samples for explosives using that circular reasoning that you just stated. Mm-hmm. And so why should the American people trust the 9/11 investigation that was never completed? Again, in an investigation, if there's any reasonable chance... Forget about who was to blame for a minute. Let's just put that in the back seat, okay? Let's just say that Al Qaeda had access to these highly secure buildings and could have possibly done it. Why wouldn't you test just to rule that out, to make sure that the U.S. government didn't really screw up, that our intelligence services were not really that bad, and then we could fix the problem? Why wouldn't you rule out the use of explosives, especially since it's the first time that steel frame high-rises had ever completely collapsed like that? It had Building 7 completely collapsing because of random fires, allegedly.
Sure. I mean, there's a couple other points there. I mean, why wouldn't you do it just because there's a large body of 2,000, almost 2,000 professional architects and engineers now. You have scientists for 9/11 Truth, firefighters for 9/11 Truth. I mean, and a massive 9/11 Truth movement who all want this done just to, ease the public's mind on this, you think you would do it. I mean, these politicians seem to, like you said about the C-SPAN, that gets upset that the question's raised. Well, then do the test. Put everybody's minds at ease then, and have a blue ribbon panel of experts that's overseen by somebody that everybody can agree on do this, I mean, Stephen Jones and company said that they would sit down with this and they would talk this over and try to, we'll work with you, and no, they didn't want to sit down at the table. They didn't want to do it. It's very suspicious behavior, And there's just...
Well, it is, and I just want to say, I was just thinking about myself, and if I was overseeing an investigation and this happened on my watch, I would know that I would be put under a microscope, and rightly so, with an event of this scale, and so I would want to cover every single base that I can, and of course you'll have people like John McCain will say, oh, I think they did a fine job for America, they stepped up to the plate, but they really didn't, and they aren't covering every base, and so I would want to dot every I, cross every T, and know that there would be people out there, even if you're one of these folks that just, I don't want to hear any conspiracy theories, I don't want to, but you'll know that there's going to be people out there questioning it, so why wouldn't you just cut them off at the head? Why wouldn't you just allay any fears right from the get-go so you don't have to hear people like me on the radio talking about this 11 years later, but they didn't.
Yeah, and if they could prove you wrong, then, you can maybe be focused on the issues they think you should be focused on or whatever. And then there's also the point that Eric Lawyer from Firefighters for 911 Truth, that's firefightersfor911truth.org, he talks about the National Protection Fire Association manual for investigations, and it talks about when there's high-order damage, that they should look for exotic accelerants, including thermite. So it's explicitly stated in the manual. That's another big point to be made, is that, according to the 2001 edition of the NFPA, that it's absolutely what they should have done. Not just that they should do it just to, quell or quench our fears or whatever, but, there were manuals at the time that said, based on what was observed, that should have, there was definitely high order damage that took place, and it gets a little more, if you read the manual, it gets very descriptive in what that means, and if there's breaking and melting of concrete and such,
Well, just from an investigative standpoint, wouldn't you think if you're the FBI investigating the biggest mass murder, biggest alleged terrorist attack in U.S. history, okay, this was a planned event, and then you're suspicious about whether or not there was a foreign government behind it, and if it was a sophisticated operation, why wouldn't you cover every base? Like I said, okay, you saw planes go into the building, but how do you know that somebody, a foreign government or whatever, didn't have a spy that got access to the building and was somehow able to rig this? And I'm going to tell you, folks, a lot of people walk around in a haze, and you can get away with a lot of stuff in plain sight. And I'm not advocating the position, that there really was that it was really a foreign attack on the U.S. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. But why wouldn't you go from that angle just to explore it? I mean, you would just rule out the use of explosives from the get-go. Sure. It shows that you don't want people looking in that direction.
Sure. I mean, Crockett Gravy, physicist, was asked, could it have been foreign terrorists? And he said, yeah, it could have been. I can't rule it out completely. And you can't rule anything out until you do the test. So, you got to find out if it's there first, and then you can go from there and try to figure out who put it there. And that's kind of AE911 Truth's position, is that, we'll start with the science and go from there.
Well, and I think that gives the politicians a little bit of wiggle room if you give them that line, because a lot of these people, in order for them to acknowledge it, are going to have to save face. Mm-hmm. And so if you maybe throw that out there, and I'm sure people will disagree with me in saying that this might be a good olive branch to offer, but say, okay, you think who you want was responsible, and I'll think who I want, but let's just look at the forensic evidence, and in the end, if you want to, still blame this on Al-Qaeda, foreign Muslim boogeymen, that's your business, but let's establish what actually happened to these buildings to start with, and then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Yeah. That's the responsible way to approach it.
Yeah, Eric Lawyer from Firefighters for 911 Truth says the same thing. He says, look, 1993 World Trade Center bombing, foreign terrorists, we know that they used explosives then, so why wouldn't you test now, So he kind of uses the same position, So.
Right, and again, science should unite us. Everybody should be flying under the banner of the science, regardless of whether you're a debunker or you're a truther, whatever. Again, it focuses. There's certain laws of the universe that didn't change just because it was 9/11 that day. Now, I just want to ask you, there's some things you write in here that I'd like to get a clearer explanation of. Now, when you wrote in your article, the advantage of superthermite is the possibility to tailor the ignition characteristics to fit different applications. What does that mean? Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, there's one thing that's talked about in the active thermitic material paper is that the properties could be tailored to possibly lower the audible level of the explosions. And they derived that from papers written about nanothermite before. But like I said, there's things like super thermite matches that can ignite other high explosives. So that could have been the role of them. It can be, like if you look at Jonathan Cole, he's a civil engineer, AE911 Truth, civil engineer who did some tests and made a video called The Great Thermate Debate. He shows there that even just a version of thermite called thermate can be quite pretty explosive in its own right, and that it can be tailored to cut vertically. It's just a very highly tailorable material. It can be anywhere from an incendiary to a pyrotechnic to an explosive. It can be an igniter.
And this is an ordinary thermite, just to reiterate to the audience. This is something that was tailor-made for doing this kind of work. And so, I point this out too. I mean, I've had people, or I've heard expressions say, if you're going to do something bad, do it big. If you're going to steal, steal a lot. If you're going to cheat, cheat big, okay? If you're going to pull off a false flag, do it big, do it the right way. So, of course, whatever is being used is going to be some highly engineered, high-grade stuff because they don't want to screw this up.
And if you actually, on AE911Truth.org, they have FAQ number 8, written by Adam Taylor, again, from my blog, and it's called, What is Nanothermite? Could it have been used to demolish the World Trade Center skyscrapers? And so that's a good one to look at there. He talks about how it's developed at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and how highly tailorable it is. It's also one of the points there that it was used in demolition at the Skyride Tower in Chicago and the dome of the German Reichstag building. So it has been used in that's just regular thermite. It's been used in building demolition applications before. So.
Now, it says in the article that if any paint could create those iron microspheres, it would be highly dangerous when dry and most unlikely to receive regulatory approval for building use.
Sure.
And I think that's a very important point. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a paint when it's subjected to 430 degrees of heat, I mean, if it was in a fire, it's going to, go with this runaway reaction and increase in temperature 1,000 degrees centigrade. That's not safe at all. It's not something I would want painted on my walls in my house. They've tried to explain that away by saying it was fly ash residue, or fly ash was what was the explanation for the molten iron spheres, but none of it holds. It is molten iron spheres being produced from this reaction. I mean, and if they really wanted to debunk it and show that it wasn't happening again with the ignition test, if he did the ignition test, then he could see what was being created, and if he wanted to show that it wasn't molten iron spheres, then he could do that at that point, try to do that. I think the fact that he's not doing those ignition tests and therefore not having to study that byproduct is quite telling.
Well, it is. It's funny. I had somebody making a joke to me last week because, he knows what I do and we talk about it. And he's not too deep into this issue, just a regular guy shooting the stuff with me. But he was making the joke that, we could truly find out what happened if we built World Trade Centers to scale and rammed a plane into them and then watched and see if we could recreate the same reaction. Now, he's kidding around. You don't need to go to that kind of extreme, though. you can just basically do the kind of experiment that Mark Basile is trying to do, and that we're trying to get Dr. Millett to do. I mean, theoretically, and again, I'm not a scientist, but it just seems like if you could get on tape Mark and Dr. Millett going to the same monument, scraping off the same paint primer paint from this, and then going back and doing the exact same experiments themselves, that you would want to have that as your, have that as the structure of the whole thing, and then see what happens. You don't need to recreate the World Trade Center. You simply need to do these experiments, but the other side is refusing to do them.
Yeah, a couple things there. I mean, it would be interesting to have a scale model test that wasn't just a computer model. I've also said that it'd be quite expensive too, but they spent $20 million on just the computer animations, which stopped short of which just ended at collapse initiation, and then NIST just says, well, you can just see what happened after that. The buildings just fall down. Didn't try to show, what happened structurally to the buildings after the point of the initiation. But Millett, the paint that is from the monument that Basile shows in the video, it's Tenemic. It's from the Tenemic Paint Company in Pittsburgh, PA. It was very widely used in the towers. They have proposed another type of paint that they thought might be the candidate, but it's the characteristics aren't matching up. So as of yet, he's ruled out, Millett himself has ruled out 177 variations of Tenemic, the other paint that was proposed, and so it's a yet as of unidentified paint, which I think is interesting, because if it's an unidentified paint, it's showing up in these samples. I mean, the authors of the paper said that it could constitute, based on extrapolating from how much is in the samples they have, it could be 10 tons of material. So that'd be a whole lot of paint in the building that just can't be identified.
Well, it is, and that's an interesting angle. I didn't think about that, but you have a company that produces paint, and you said that if paint produces, and it's kind of funny, folks, if you think about it, this is a very dangerous world that the people at NIST live in, okay? You have buildings that can just fall down on your head when a random fire breaks out, steel frame high-rises that can just completely collapse at free fall, and then now you got the paint having thermitic reactions when it's ignited, or when it reaches a certain temperature. That's a very dangerous world that the people in NIST live in. Thank God I don't live in their world. But seriously, though, you have a company that is having its paint blamed for creating this reaction, and you said it's very dangerous. That's a liability to them. And so is there any way, and you may not be even able to answer this question, it's something that we have to kind of think about for a little while, but would there be any way of having a record of what paint was used in the World Trade Center in the years that the buildings were still standing, and then contacting those companies and asking, for their own chemical tests on this paint that they may have produced during those years that were used?
Well, that's the thing. We do know the Tenemic paint was used. The other paint, I think it's pronounced Laclede, that they had proposed was used. Neither one of those fit the characteristics of the red gray chips, and there were probably other paints used, but we don't have any records that I'm aware of. I don't think any debunkers have offered any, or any other such paints that have been proposed. So it's a yet as of identified paint. So we might find something at some point, but there's no paint that we're aware of that seems to fit the chemical composition even of these red gray chips, let alone the properties, what happens when they're ignited. So.
Has Kinemic spoke out, though, or is this just your side, like just the scientists speaking out? Because it seems like...
No, they haven't spoken out themselves.
And that's silly, because if I owned a paint company and someone was saying that my paint had this, was this dangerous, I'd be coming out and saying, hey guys, I know you're trying to protect an official lie here, but don't be blaming me. Don't be blaming my company. My paint is good. Okay, my paint doesn't have this. I'd be making a big statement. It's interesting that they haven't come out and completely disavowed what the debunkers are saying. Well,
the debunkers, I think, are in agreement that it's not Tenemic. So, the video just goes to show that no other paint that we can find is doing this, and if it is a paint, that's the only one that is igniting and creating these spears, but it doesn't match the chemical composition for any other known paints in the World Trade Center either. So there's really no company that would need to do that right now, because there's no paint that really matches, even the chemical composition to be these chips. Does that make sense?
I know what you mean. Yeah, and just to narrow it down, because I'm kind of thinking here while we're recording this episode. But the Twin Towers stood for a little while. They stood for a long time in the span of our lifetime, but in the span of bigger history, they weren't up very long. And theoretically, assuming that that one of them or so didn't die in the disaster themselves, or just pass on from natural causes, you could get a list of people that were in charge of maintenance at these buildings, of painting and doing these day-to-day things, and they could tell you what kind of paints were used if you could track them down and find some kind of record of it, and try to figure out where this is coming from if you want to believe that it's paint.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of related to that is that there were like fireproofing upgrades going on in the floors of impact, the floors of failure, just prior months to the 9/11 event. That's something that Kevin Ryan has pointed out in a couple papers that he's written. So this could have been, the nanothermite could have been sprayed on as under the guise of actually fire retardant. That's one of the possibilities. So, but yeah, digging into records, and A.D. Monahan is a person that's dug into a lot of these records, and it gets interesting because, like, even with like the largest producer of nano aluminum and that would be used for these type of materials for nanothermites and whatnot was the Navy. It's a Navy branch. I can't remember the name offhand. But one of their labs that was producing this material, but yet when asked under FOIA requests, Freedom of Information requests for records about that, nothing comes up. So wherever there should be some information, there's a lot of, sorry, we don't have any records of, that material that was produced or that work that was done at the towers during that time. There's people that have tried to look into, what about the elevator upgrades and the fireproofing, all that kind of things, and there's always a dead end. So,
well, folks, let this be a lesson to you about how important record keeping is and backing it up. Even if you think that it's mundane, that it's not, that it's no one's ever going to need it, you have no clue. You have no idea where something like that could come in handy. So let that be a lesson for the future. Now, John, I like to end these broadcasts and kind of focus on our audience and what our audience can do. And I know you heard the clip earlier of a young lady calling into C-SPAN. Mm-hmm. And there's been people calling to C-SPAN, many activists asking very good questions, and they get danced around. And the problem that I see is, you're a smart guy, Mark's a smart guy, and you guys can talk about this. And I'm fairly smart. I can understand it when I read it. But there's people out there are smart too, but they don't have the time to focus on this like we do. The politicians, their eyes just kind of glaze over, and a lot of this goes over their head. Their brain automatically goes into deflection mode, defensive mode. Mm-hmm. And from your experience and your own insight, what can the audience do to try to boil this down for people in power, for anyone who might be able to make a difference in helping to expose this from a position that they hold? How can people help and get this information out to more and more people, important people?
Well, I mean, as far as, what Mark Basile is trying to do, I appreciate being called smart, but Mark is the scientist here. I'm a layman. I'm doing the best I can, But I often point out that if you are a juror and you're, if there's a forensic evidence in the case, you're going to hear from two sides and you have to decide which side is right. And so there's no problem with normal people taking a side on this issue. That's something that can always be pointed out. But the video that was made, that Adam put together, I asked him to put it together and kind of gave him suggestions for it. Wasn't able to make videos at the time, but he did a really great job. And it just showing those ignitions of the paints versus the thermite. If people just could put that video out there, kind of spread that around, I think it would really help the study, even for, if you don't think that people are going to read this huge article, or the video is just, it's they say a picture speaks 1,000 words, and it really does. I mean, you can just see there's one of these things is not like the other, one of these things is not quite the same. Don't you think we should look into this? And that's kind of the way I view the video. The activism that they did. Adam also is one of the ones that made a call to C-SPAN. He called, and then a friend of his called back to back, talking about the issue. and I know they don't get much time to do that, but the way that it did tie into the NSA, you know, they tried to, the people on C-SPAN tried to say, well, you know, we're talking about a different issue here. Well, geez, I wish I'd have got in there and said, no, it's not a different issue. These things are all interconnected, but, so, you know, that stuff's good. At my site, for what it's worth, we have an activism section on the side scroll bar. You know, there's lots of petitions, activism ideas. I link to every page I've been able to find that I think is a good page from different 9/11 Truth sites about their activism ideas, and so people could definitely go check that out at the 9/11 Debunkers blog.
Right, and I didn't play that clip on the show, but people will see that clip you just referenced in the compilation. It's funny how that got timed because actually the first one was John Metters, and then the next one was Adam Taylor, and it's just funny how Adam just followed up right after that. But then there was a guy that came on after him, and you know that wasn't asking about 9/11, but he said something about how if America's ever destroyed, it'll be destroyed from within. And sometimes I think the universe works in strange ways, and that guy was a perfect period or exclamation point to the two 9/11 questions or attempted 9/11 questions that John and Adam contributed, and I think that really hit home, and you can kind of see it. And the guy they were talking to was from the Federation of American Scientists, so it's very relevant. Unfortunately, you know, when is C-SPAN going to do a segment on Building 7? I don't know of any time soon that they're going to do it. I hope they prove me wrong. So we got to break through, and we got to ask these kinds of questions. Now, in our last minute or two, do you have any other projects coming up, any other articles that you want our audience to be looking out for and spreading?
Not really. I've been really focused on this. I mean, I want to see this thing through to the end, and then we'll kind of see. I kind of tackle little things here and there. One thing I can say is that Adam and myself have been working on a book that would be a book version of the blog. So I've been trying to expand my work on NORAD. If anybody's interested in the NORAD issue, at the top of the blog, there's a link where it says NORAD Stand Down. You can hear, I did an interview with Jeff Hill on his Pump It Out radio about that issue. So that's something I've been trying to slowly add on and expand on my research on that. But no, my main area of focus right now has been the Mark Basile thing. So again, markbasile.org. If anybody can even donate $1, it helps. Please help us get there, and let's see where this thing goes.
Yeah, and folks, activism can be fun. If you want to go out and collect cans, like in the road, you help clean up the community, and you go bring in for the money, you donate that money to Mark Basile to do his test that he needs, okay? I mean, there's ways you can do bake sales, do things to raise money for this important effort. It is more important than you would ever think, folks, okay? And spread the information to your professors. Spread it everywhere you go. If you want a skeptical look at it, bring it to your college professors who are chemical engineers and get their opinions on it, and see where they go. You know,
it's interesting.
John.
I had a person he was going to show my recent article to one of his professors, and I gave him an advanced copy of it, and the professor was, I don't know. His answer was, I don't know, and I don't want to know. And I think that's a pretty pervasive train of thought with the cognitive dissonance there. It's unfortunate. I did want to point out the other thing is if anybody knows anybody with World Trade Center dust or wants to actively seek out some, Mark is still looking for samples to study, so that is another thing. Anybody has some or knows where to get some or wants to try to seek out some, that would be great, and they can contact me at jmtalbot@gmail.com or jtalbot@AE911Truth.org and let me know if they can give me a lead on that. So.
All right, we'll have a link to those emails up on the archive here, so in case somebody's listening a few months from now and they have it, they can contact you. John Michael, we are out of time. Thank you for coming on 9/11 Freefall. Remember, folks, you can listen to this program every Thursday night on No Lies Radio at 10 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Pacific. This is Andy Steele saying good luck and have a great week.